The Property Pod. Welcome to The Property Pod with Moneyweb. The property sector is an ever-changing sector, and in this podcast series, your host, Suren chats to movers and shakers in the property industry.
Welcome to The Property Pod, South Africa's premier property investor podcast, a weekly show where we gain insider insights from leading executives, analysts, developers, and entrepreneurs in the country's expansive property industry. This week's episode is a little different. It's just me, but it's a wrap of my favorite episode since the podcast launched. The Property Pod marked its 150th episode recently and has been going since 2021, following our pilot episodes in 2020 just before COVID lockdowns. So in this week's edition, I offer my top 10 episodes from our 150 podcasts. For those of you who aren't aware, the Property Pod is one of the most popular weekly podcasts on Moneyweb in terms of listens and transcript reads. We'll get a bit more regular with our transcripts going forward. For those of you who would prefer to read, then listen to the podcast. The Property Pod has also been rated as one of South Africa's top investor podcasts by CrowdSQ, which is based out of Bulgaria, believe it or not. But we will take it. We were listed just below Investec Focus Radio at number 2 by CrowdSQ. So here are my top 10 podcasts since launch. My selection is a mix of both top listened to podcasts over the years and some of my favorite interviews. These top 10 are in no particular order, but I will kick off with one of our most listened to podcasts on the Property Pod ever. This episode was back in May 2023 when SA interest rates were higher following COVID lows. The episode was titled Managing Your Home Loan as Interest Rates Spike, with guest Corné Velman from Consult by Momentum, who offered insights and shared tips on how homeowners can manage in a high interest rate environment. Things may have changed on the interest rate front in South Africa since then, but go back and listen to the podcast. Some of those tips can be applied no matter where the interest rate is at. On that note, my next selection on the list is our 150th pod or 150th episode published on 11 March this year. It was with Simon Brown, the founder of Just One Lap and host of Moneyweb Now on Moneyweb, who weighed in on renting versus buying. It was titled Lower Interest Rates, Simon Brown Renting versus Buying a Home, and Simon offered some tips to save money on a bond, like Velman's episode. Let's see where interest rates go now in the midst of volatile markets globally and in the wake of Trump tariffs and a global trade war. My next choice on my list of top 10 favorite episodes is one from back in May 2021, but it is based on a perennial issue that affects the commercial property sector in South Africa, municipal rates and taxes. On that podcast, titled SAPOA, Spiraling Municipal Rates Represent Catastrophic Value Destruction, I interviewed Neil Gopal, CEO of the South African Property Owners Association, or SAPOA. He was quite vocal on the matter, especially as municipal service delivery in South Africa has declined significantly over the years, barring Cape Town and a few other municipalities in the country. Talking Cape Town, the property scene continues to blossom there, and an episode I particularly enjoyed back in 2023 was with Rob Kane, chair of the Cape Town Central City Improvement District. The CID continues to do great things as arguably SA's most successful urban improvement precinct and is one of more than 50 in the mother city now. This episode, titled Cape Town CBD is Booming with Property Development Activity, and that continues today in terms of the boom in Cape Town, considering its huge infrastructure plans by the city. Staying on the mother city, another episode that goes on my list of top 10 fave podcasts is my interview with the CEO of the V&A Waterfront, David Green, back in September 2021. It seems everyone is reporting on the big plans to expand this iconic property now, but Moneyweb was one of the first to highlight the plans in the works almost 4 years ago in an episode titled Cape Town's V&A Waterfront Plans Julian Crown Development in a Post-COVID Future. That was just a year after COVID, and obviously the V&A took quite a knock then, as did many shopping centers across the country. But way back then, it was planning for this mega development. Things are gaining momentum on that project with more information set to be released. So keep reading and listening Moneyweb for more. We have already had an exclusive on the project, and one of the owners, Growth Point Properties, let the cat out of the bag, as it were, regarding a new hotel planned for the V&A Waterfront last year. In their results presentation, you might want to find that report on Moneyweb. I'm not going to share more, but look out for an update on that from Moneyweb soon. On Growth Point, we had a fascinating profile interview with its CEO, Norbert Sasser, back on our 50th episode of the Property Pod back in March 2023. Growth Point is SA's largest locally listed real estate investment trust, or REIT. The episode, titled Sasser on Leading Growth Point from 118 million to 175 billion rand company, makes my top 10 favorites list. It also was a top 5 listened to podcast for 2023. My 7th choice on the list is an interview with Maloske Kana, the CEO of Parento Limited, also in 2023. I have interviewed him twice on the podcast, but that interview, which was my first with him, titled Joburg Needs the Finest People to Lead the City, was when he was president of SAPOA. I particularly appreciated how vocal he was on the podcast about service delivery and leadership at municipal level in South Africa. And considering Joburg is hosting the G20 this year, those comments are very, very significant, and a lot of people are complaining that Joburg needs to clean up its act ahead of hosting that event. Meanwhile, Jackie van die Kerk, the CEO of JSE-listed REIT Attack, was another former SAPOA president featured on the Property Pod. I interviewed her on her role at Attack in a special Women's Month episode in August 23, titled Jackie van die Kerk on Leading Attack and the Waterfall City Mega Development. She is one of the leading women CEOs of a JSE-listed company, and I like the way she gave credit to her team for leading the turnaround at Attack, including its big funding deal with the Government Employees Pension Fund. Another new city development is coming out the ground in KZN called Westtown, and it made the news recently with the opening of its first phase, the High Street-centered Westtown Square. An interview I did with its CEO, Carlos Correa, back in July 2023 makes my top 10 favorite list, as it is a major development and was also one of our top 5 episodes in that year. It was titled 15 billion rand Westtown Development Bets on KZN Comeback, and it was topical at the time considering it was recorded a couple of years after the devastating KZN riots. And my final choice in my top 10 podcasts in our first 150 podcasts of the show is my interview with the CEO of Stain City Properties, Stephen Lowe, in October 2024. It was a great update on one of South Africa's most prestigious mega estate developments near Fourways in Johannesburg. This episode was simply titled, What's Happening at the Multi-Billion Rand Stain City, and was also one of our top listened to episodes of the Property Pod in 2024. In February this year, Dow Steyn, the South African insurance billionaire behind Stain City's development, passed away, aged 72. He is recognized as one of the country's top entrepreneurial success stories. Stay tuned to the Property Pod for entrepreneurs, developers, CEOs, and the inside track on what's happening in SA's commercial and residential property sector. That concludes my wrap of my top 10 favorite podcasts of the Property Pod. That's from our first 150 episodes. Here's to many more episodes of SA's top property investor podcast right here on Moneyweb.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Property Pod with Suren Naidu. To listen to more episodes, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates. Follow Suren on Twitter @Suren Naidu for more of his property industry content and other business stories. The Property Pod.
Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.